So recruiting season, everybody's out on the road right now. This is kind of relationship building season. I mean, this is when a lot of the work's being done, right?
Yeah, so right now the NCAA is in the evaluation period, which like in January, remember, you could every week, it's kind of like you're closing on signing day, and every week you can see a guy, you send the coaches out for an in-home visit or whatever, and then the next week you do it again, and the next week you do it again, and you lead up to signing day. We're in the point now where you can see a guy twice all spring, so it's not like you can go every week, but Brian Kelly and the staff are out, and I think a big goal for them and all these coaches is you want to go by a school when they're practicing or when that kid's playing baseball or running track or whatever it might be, so you can get an eval in. It's not just that you're going to drop by and talk to the principal or the athletic director or coach or whatever it might be. They want to be able to watch these guys work out and then hopefully be in some sort of football practice or scrimmage setting. So a lot of it's just mapping that out with your top targets. And I think, look, they haven't taken a ton of commitments. I think they're at 4 right now, total commits, which obviously they'll get above 25, so a long way to go. But this period for them, a completely new staff, I think they view it as pretty critical. I think this and then summer camp, which happens next month, pretty much the entire month of June, is big for evaluations in terms of kind of who can move up the board, who might grab a new offer, who might slide down the board, and then from there you can really kind of push and piece the class together. But this is kind of them, this month into next month too, is them figuring out really for the first time of, we've seen the film, but how do these guys look in person?
We have curiosity probably from both sides. What have you heard from the player standpoint of LSU coaches being out on the trail and now recruiting and relationship building? And from the staff side, what is it like now representing on the trail with a full allotment of a recruiting season to play with?
Yeah, I think they feel a bit more at home, obviously, than they did in January with settled in, understand what Coach Kelly wants, understand what their board looks like at every coach's position. You look at a guy like Joe Sloan, who's sort of been all over the country recruiting quarterbacks as LSU's quarterbacks coach, and the list is kind of whittled down in a way, right? It's Dante Moore up in Michigan, Jaiden Ausberry in California. You've got Ricky Collins here in Baton Rouge. And it's kind of evident at this point that Eli Holstein's probably not going to LSU, and Arch Manning's probably not going to LSU. And it's good that they've gone out there and really put a lot of effort into recruiting some other guys. And like I mentioned, you've got a pretty good quarterback. Number 12 quarterback in the country is playing at Woodlawn. So you've got a really deep Louisiana class. You've got some out-of-state guys, 5 stars that have interest. And it's about just going out, watching them, and then trying to get them back for visits. And I mentioned quarterback because during this eval period and coming out of kind of the months of March and April, seeing guys is big, evaling them is huge, but then continuing to get them to campus is big. And Dante Moore used his first official visit on LSU. Jaiden Ausberry just dropped into LSU after an official visit to Ole Miss. He'll be back for an official visit. So I think right now they're trying to get those evals in, but also try to get these kids around campus as much as possible, which really means it's Monday to Friday you're on the road, and then Friday you're back, and over the weekend you're hosting guys on campus, and then you're back at it again, and that's kind of how the entire month of May will play out.
Did the change in staff kind of turn the heat up on Ricky Collins?
I think it's probably the old staff had offered him a scholarship at summer camp. I think it might have been at the 7-on-7 tournament a year ago. And at that camp, La Tech was there because, all these colleges from around the state are invited in for camp each summer, whether it was with Coach O or whether now it's with Brian Kelly. But Joe Sloan was the OC. So he's got a relationship with Ricky Collins. He's evaled him plenty. I think they're in a point right now. Look, they've been dropping by the high school. Ricky's been over to visit number of times. I know that he and Sloan have a good relationship. So I think it's in that spot where they're waiting to kind of continue to push for out-of-state guys. Dante Moore, I mentioned Rashada, but really recruiting even Collins, all of them the same to where you get into the months of June and July and these guys start popping and you figure out what the board might look like. But I will say the Elite 11 this year I'm pretty interested to see. I don't think Arch is going because I don't think he worked out at any of the Elite 11 regionals, but Eli Holstein got an invite.
What a life.
Ricky Collins got an invite.
Never do anything.
Rashada, Dante Moore. So pretty much every quarterback beyond Arch that LSU's in on is going to be throwing one after the other and next to each other in June at the Elite 11. So LSU fans will probably have a bit of interest in seeing how the guys do out there.
Shea, I'm going to stay at Woodlawn, but Jordan Matthews, where does LSU stand with him?
I think, look, his dad played at LSU, so he's a legacy. And I mentioned the eval period being big. His track and field has been big this spring, I think, because he's run some really nice times. A sub-11 guy. I think that when you look at that athletic profile, having a dad who played high-level SEC football at LSU, having those track times, I think it really goes a long way into colleges thinking, okay, this is a guy we can develop and mold into a really good corner, DB, or wherever you see a fit for him in the defensive backfield. That said, I kind of think he's been leaning out of state. I think A&M's recruited him really hard for a really long time. He's picking up new offers seemingly every week. I know Stanford came through with an offer, but he's one they've already been out and watched at Woodlawn. They'll see again. And then I think for guys like that, and this goes back to the Frank Wilson days, which I think will be the same now, you got to come to camp, and then I think everything changes at camp, right? You could shoot up the board or whatever it might be, but in the early Frank Wilson days at LSU, Jarvis Landry, Odell, all these guys had to come to camp. It didn't matter who you were. So I'm curious if they don't get back into more of that. We'll see how big of a priority Kelly puts on it. But Matthews is one I'm hoping comes to camp because I think he can make a pretty big statement in terms of kind of where he fits into the overall scheme of the DB board and kind of where they want to go at corner. They don't have any corner commits right now. They have a couple safeties, but the corner board seems to be wide open for Robert Steeple, so I'm curious to see what kind of direction they go.
Cardell Music asks, how is recruiting going between LSU and Jaiden Ausberry?
Good. Well, I mean, I'd say good. Look, I mean, people will point to Jaiden's brother having an offer to come to LSU and then signing with Auburn, and he'll head out here soon and enroll there for the summer. And does that mean that Jaiden's going to go out of state and Austin being the one who just signed with Auburn? I think it's too early to know. He'll be a senior coming up at U-High. But you got to remember when you go to U-High, when your dad is an AD, assistant AD, works in the athletic office for 20-plus years, when you're around every day, like when school ends, especially when they're younger, they just go hang out with dad, which is just sitting around LSU with, the who's who, whether that's over at football ops. So they grow so accustomed to being around LSU that I almost, in a weird way, think that an entire new coaching staff almost helps a little bit. And not that he wouldn't have wanted to come play for the old staff. I don't mean that at all. But I think you get so accustomed. When you're a U-High kid and you go to school your whole life on campus, and then it's time to go to college, and you've got Bama and Georgia and USC and all these teams knocking at the door, I kind of want to go do something different. Yeah. It'd like going to 13th grade for me if I keep going to LSU. And I think with a new staff, it's sort of new blood, new people to get to know, and because of that, maybe you pique his interest a bit more. But he's the real deal, and I don't think they're going to get Tackett Curtis, who out of Manny. I think he goes out of state. I haven't seen him show any incredible interest in LSU to this point. He visits all these out-of-state schools. He's a really good player, but you want to keep one of these big linebackers in state. I think that Ausberry is your hope.
That seems like a Brian Kelly prototype right there.
Yeah, well, maybe they do. But look, I just haven't. He's out visiting Ohio State and Southern Cal and all these out-of-state schools. And not that anything's wrong with that. I think just for a long time he's thought about going out of state, and he's got all of those offers, so I wouldn't be surprised by it.
Whichever one has the best weight room.
Lucas Simmons is a four-star offensive tackle that they handed out a offer to last week. Where are they on offensive line recruiting? Because this will be a big cycle for them on that position, right?
Yeah, I mean, look, I start always in state, and then I work out from there. Say, what do you have here? They don't have any commitments yet, but Zalance Hurd up at Neville, who played, him and Will Campbell were the offensive tackles for him this past year. We've seen Campbell's a beast. I think Hurd is a really good prospect. They've offered him. So he's one big name to watch. A guy I don't think it's talked about enough is coming out of St. Aug and Tyree Adams. He's camped at LSU before. He got an offer from the old staff. He got an offer from the new staff. But quietly almost, I think that he's put together some really good film. His measurables are elite, for an offensive lineman. He's tested well at some of these combines over the course of this offseason, and he keeps picking up big offers. So I think that's a guy who we'll look back at and say, if they do end up getting him or not, either way, that he was a big-time prospect, a potential, in my mind, top 5 prospect in the state this year. So those two guys jump out at me. There's other O-linemen in the state. Caden Jones over at De La Salle is a guy who had gotten an offer from the old staff and is getting looks from the new staff over the course of the spring eval period, and we'll see him at summer camp. But those guys are the guys I'd kind of start with. But look, you've got the portal, and then you've got a ton of out-of-state guys that I've never seen, and we know why. But the amount of players from the Midwest that are showing real interest in LSU, and it's because Kelly and Polian and a lot of these guys had already been recruiting them. So you kind of pick up where you left off there, and Brad Davis, I think, has done a really, really good job. I think he was kept for a reason. I think he's got a real good rapport with these kids. Coming from Arkansas, I think Sam Pittman's one of the best O-line coaches out there, not just technically, but he understands the kids. He recruits them well. I mean, he was getting guys to Arkansas that are NFL-type players. So, and he had been at Georgia prior to that, who's obviously recruits really well. I think Brad Davis is kind of a chip off that block. I think that when I talk to recruits and parents, they'll mention Brad Davis as much as any. Like, O-linemen are so quick to say, well, I like LSU because of Brad Davis. So I think when you look at Kelly's track record of Notre Dame offensive linemen and getting to the NFL, and then obviously what I mentioned about Davis, that they'll have a chance to clean up with some big names. So out of state, I'd still want to see kind of how the dominoes drop in terms of who comes for official visits, who may pop over the summer. We won't know anything on the transfer portal for a while. That's something you do pretty much after the season. So for me, I think it all starts right now with a few names in state, and certainly these out of state guys are big and talented, but you just don't know where the dominoes will fall there until you get a bit more into the recruiting process. But for me, I'd put Tyree Adams and Hurd up there as two of the biggest on my wish list.
Is he recruiting Louisiana the same way, with the same, I guess, vigor as Coach O was, or is this going to be the way it looks moving forward with a more national approach? O was big on, build the fence.
Right, and I think that they'll come to look, you're not going to – then Kelly said it, but I think you can say, look, Louisiana – you can read it on paper and say, they've got per capita one of the top, SEC level, high level, high school rankings, NFL, future talent, however you want to break it up, that Louisiana's always up there with Georgia and California or Texas, Florida, those type of states. So you have to, that in your mind, as you take this job, you have to recruit the state. I think it'll settle in more to them as a staff of, do we really need to fly all the way out to, wherever it might be, New Jersey for this guy, if we've got a guy that's maybe a little less talented, right along the same, let's say, ranking or long-term projection, and he's in, New Orleans or wherever it might be. And I think you kind of settle into that. I think, though, it's a good thing that out of the gates they're trying to have a national reach, sell the brand nationally, because, look, you're coming off of back-to-back 500 regular seasons. I mean, if you want to say, I can put on the LSU polo and it can get me into any high school, well, cool. Like, these kids right now, when they were in 10th and 11th grade, they sucked. LSU sucked. Yeah. They were in 9th grade about to start playing football when you won a national championship. So I think that you've got to create some sort of momentum and excitement, and certainly if you're making a new coaching hire at the very top and you've done the same all the way to everyone beyond Brad Davis, that you want to go out there and put your face in front of every state and try to go national. And I like that approach, but I think that over time that circles back to where we see them try to get, try to hit double-digit guys in Louisiana and then fill it all in from there.
Reuben Owens is the number one tailback in the country right now, and he's got some love from LSU. He's out of Texas, and it seems like Texas is the leading school there. What are you hearing on the latest on him?
Yeah, I think he's going to end up with the Longhorns. They already have one commit from a top 10 running back. I won't be surprised at all if Reuben Owens goes there. I think there's a kid in Florida, Singleton, who they had brought in for an unofficial visit. Frank had offered him early on, and they seemed to like him a good bit. But I think that as time's gone on, I kind of come back around. This maybe goes with that Louisiana question. I think Trey Holly will be the first running back to commit into the class, and he's here. Louisiana guy, 4-star. He's been uber productive across his high school career. He's been a 3-year starter. Another guy I like is Caleb Jackson here at Liberty in Baton Rouge. I think he's a guy that, as he continues to pick up more offers, as they see him in the spring, as he gets in front of him in summer camp, that he keeps moving himself up the big board. So those are two guys there. There's a running back out of Texas, out of I think he's at Klein Forest. I don't know if you have the running back rankings up. Patrick, I don't know why I'm blanking on it. I was going to say Jenkins, but he was an old defensive lineman. Anyhow, he's a guy that got offered, and a lot of people in Texas feel like maybe LSU leads there. So there's a group of about 3 of them I would circle as ones I'm really watching. And look, I think they were in it on Ruben Owens at a point. The old staff was heavy on him, but as time went on, it seems like the Longhorns are team to beat there. So I think that I'd watch a couple Louisiana guys, and then like I mentioned, they've got one guy out of Texas, a 4-star. We can Google it. I'll figure it out.
Recruiting season right now, out on the road.
Yeah, it's just evals.
Yeah.
And the official visits and all that'll heat back up here soon, and certainly into June is going to be a real. I mean, June will be summer camps, official visits, a pretty key stretch. I mean, they'll pick up some commits. The board will, kind of shuffle out through summer camp, and kind of towards the end of that month, it goes kind of all the way to the end of the month. So, yeah, this next 2 months I would sum up as probably 2 of the more important months of the recruiting process. And it's not just because they may get some commits out of it. I think it's just going to go a long way in determining how this class ultimately looks, because it's going to kind of flesh out who they do really like and who they may not be pressing as hard for.
Geaux247 is the website. 247sports.com is where you find them. They are Geaux247 covering LSU football and recruiting. Shea does it as good as anybody out there, man. Find him and read him on Twitter and keep up with all the social media at Shea Dixon. He's through here routinely. We appreciate you interacting and asking questions and getting involved here during this segment as LSU recruiting right now, along with the rest of college football, in the roster building phase. This is a relationship building and a roster building time for college football and LSU in particular, and for the latest on recruiting. Make sure you keep up with them over at Geaux247.
You mentioned a little bit about U-High. How much does Nick Brosette maybe sway those kids back to LSU a little bit?
I don't think it hurts at all, right? I like that hire. What is it, like high school or alumni relations?
Right.
Someone who's going to deal with the former players, basically. And Nick's probably one of the more likable guys that's played here in the past decade, and through his recruitment, he knows a lot of the older guys. So, I think you span a good time period with guys he actually knows well. And then former players that are older than that, I think that he'll kind of fit in right perfectly with. So, I like that hire a lot. Can't hurt, right?
Right.
Can only help. So, we'll see.
And
Nick, you're on the clock. Jaiden Ausberry, you're up.
That's the thing about that. I told him that. I was like, the thing about you getting this job is that you got a mark early on that people are going to be able to judge and tell by.
It's a win or a loss.
Absolutely, very early.